Slowly it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, and thanks for coming back to the channel. This video, as you probably saw with the thumbnail, is going to address a video I've been wanting to do for a while, which ties into the air conditioning system on these 60s Lincolns. Now, if you've been watching the channel, you know I go through many reviews these days, mostly on Bring a Trailer, sometimes on eBay, sometimes on Facebook Marketplace. And one item that tends to be a trend is the AC typically doesn't work in these cars. And it's not necessarily due to anything other than these cars are beginning to be 60 plus years old, and they often need a little bit of work to get them working again. Now, I own two 60s Lincolns, a 64 and a 65. They're very similar. And of course, today in this video, I'm going to walk through the 65 upgrade that we decided upon. But what you'll see here, I'm going to cover in this quick intro is if your system has never been opened up, so to speak, there's an option for you there to potentially try if all of the other components are working, such as the clutch and things like that, as well as the compressor. If you have an original system that has been opened and maybe you want to just replace some of the components that you know are bad, or if you've taken it to a local AC shop or mechanic shop and they've said, hey, you need to replace such and such, this video will address that as well. You can replace certain components, you can vacuum the system, and then you can add the refrigerant. And then what I decided to do was a full upgrade. I'll talk about the other option that you have that also ties into the upgrade that I did, and that comes down to the style compressor that you desire to use. Now, as I wrap up this intro and get into the components of the upgrade we did, I would tell you, like Blair Farmer in Clearwater always tells me, every car that comes into his shop, he gets the AC working if that's on the list for the owner to do. So if the owner wants the AC working, he gets it working. And the reason why I reinforce that to you is oftentimes I'm thinking, hey, the AC system, these cars were already, some will say over-engineered, and, these systems are hard to work on and things like that. And sometimes it can be intimidating. The components that I'm going to show you today, for the most part, you could definitely do. Now, I want you to keep in mind, though, there are some additional items that you may have to do under the dash, right? You start getting into vacuum lines and you get into other components that we don't address today. But I will say this, if you turn your AC switch on in your Lincoln, if it has air conditioning, because remember, not all these cars did, if you turn that switch on or flip that switch on and everything works for the most part, except for it's not cool, which I've seen on a lot of Lincolns, then certainly today's going to help address, hopefully, your concern and resolve whatever potential issue you have in your car. But without further ado, please leave a thumbs up, and just know that if you've got AC, like Haggerty always says on their price evaluation, that typically that adds 10% value. And if you've got your AC working in your car, like I do now in my 65 and it's ice cold, it's only going to add value to your car. It's going to also make it more enjoyable for you, potentially where you live in the summer months. So let's jump right into it, and appreciate the support. So quick high level on this upgrade. What you're going to find is I'm going to talk about the condenser as well as the dryer that goes in front of the radiator. I'm going to talk about the AC compressor, the lines themselves. They're going to come back over here. There is right there with the brass looking guy, that is your expansion valve. So we'll talk about that as well. I'll also kind of just reinforce a few things that may drive you crazy if you decide to do this upgrade yourself. Now, when I left Blair's that day, I basically had everything in here just how it looks. With an ice cold AC, I drove home the entire way. The top was still down because it was a beautiful day, but it was very enjoyable to have some ice cold AC on me driving. So again, you can see right here, I'll show you some photos in a few minutes. There is your condenser with the dryer built in. You've got your clutch. I'll also talk about that. I didn't mention that a moment ago. A new compressor. You have your wiring, which you can typically reuse. That's going to go over to activate your clutch. What they call the service valves. I did have the incorrect ones. At least one of them I think was incorrect. These aren't exactly factory accurate, nor is the condenser. So we'll talk more about that. But these do work, and I do have the right ones on there. So I'll talk about that. You've got your lines, your two main lines that kind of come over here. And I'll show you a close-up here of the expansion valve. Now keep in mind the expansion valve here, I believe the one that was on here was the original, so you can see how that looks nice and new. And you can see this line right here that was remade where it bends and it goes up. That line right there, if you see where that big nut is at, it's a little bit of a pain to get back there. So I'll talk about what you could potentially do to take that nut off so you can get that line removed. Let's jump over to Google Slides and talk a little bit more about this project. All right, so let's jump over to Google Slides. Now, I've recorded this a couple times. I'm trying to streamline it and make it enough information to assist without going into too much detail. So just kind of follow with me and just know that this is kind of a high level. If you want to replace individual parts, we'll talk about that. Obviously, I'll talk about what I did with the full upgrade. Now, I want to say a huge thanks to Blair Farmer and Teresa, aka TC, as well as Chris Dunn and staff at Lincoln Land, who supplied some of the parts that I needed. I was in a pinch, and I was able to drive over and buy those. So the car details that I'm working with, it's a 65 Lincoln, about 123,000, give or take, original miles. The car is equipped with AC. That was a $505 option. Now, from what I've read and what I've kind of researched, over 90% of the 65 Lincoln Continentals were equipped with factory air conditioning. Now, I believe that to be specific to the convertibles. However, I'm not able to 100% verify that. But just know the majority of these cars, especially in 65, did have AC, which was a $505 option. You guys have know in the past, I've covered how expensive these cars were. And if someone could afford to buy the car, more than likely they could afford to add the AC. Now, really, the objective is to get the AC working. In my example, we decided upon a full upgrade with an original style York compressor, so we'll talk about that. Of course, I wanted to swap out parts for new and, in some case, good used parts. And bottom line, double check it and make sure there's absolutely no leaks, because if there's leaks, the refrigerant's going to leak out and it's not going to be cold. And then really the other objective is to help others make a decision on repairing or upgrading their air conditioned systems in their 60s Lincolns. Really, the piece there is just know that it can maybe be intimidating. I know for me, over the course of time, I always thought, wow, it's going to be tougher than I thought to get the AC working. Of course, it does take some time. It does take some money, but you can make it happen. Now, preparing this video, I really think there's kind of three ways to break it down. So what are your three options? You could, if your system it's been sealed for 60 years, and for the most part, you think that, hey, it's all original, you could try potentially, if you didn't think there were any leaks, and you could just charge your system. So we'll often see someone take it to a friend's house, take it to a mechanic shop, and just basically hook it up. And, they'll try to vacuum the system out, and then they'll add the refrigerant and or oil, and, magically it's blowing cold, right? So that could potentially be an option for you. I tend to kind of lean towards, if the system has never been opened up, that could certainly be an option for you. Number two, if the system is original and it has been maybe opened up over the course of time, or for instance, there's a certain component, or someone like a mechanic has told you a certain component is bad, you could potentially just attack that one particular piece. So if you think the evaporator's, bad, or the condenser, or the dryer, or the expansion valve, different components, you could potentially change that one component, and then you could add in the refrigerant. Now, some people will argue and say if you go with, if you have the older system and you go with the newer refrigerant, it's not as efficient, with the older condenser. I've heard both sides of that, but typically these older systems used 134A. So again, if you are 112. So if you had R112 available to you, you could change out one component and then, recharge it and you're good to go. Then in my mind, at least with this video, your third option is the full upgrade. So you can, and then this is kind of broken off to two options. If you do the full upgrade like I did, you can go A, replace components, including the similar York style compressor. That's what I have. The York compressor, and there's also another brand, that's the similar compressor that's on these cars from the factory. There's also an option if you get a different bracket. This is going a little bit above and beyond. Some people swear by the newer style compressors I refer to as like a sanding compressor. And if you get we'll talk about that. If you get the different mount, then you could run that round style compressor, whereas A is more of a square rectangle, shape, and the Sandin's more round. It's a newer style. Some people swear by that. So you have a couple of options. Now, when we look at the compressor, here's a good visual. These images were taken just by Googling 1965 Lincoln Continental air conditioned compressor. And what you see here is this is very similar to what was on the car originally. Now, the newer style one that I bought a few years ago from a local place, Classic Auto Air, it was a lot lighter than the original because they're using different kind of metals and things like that. And it just was easier to work with because it's lighter. And then this is what I refer to as the Sandin style compressor. And you can kind of see this looks more like a modern car. And there are a couple of companies out there that sell a bracket if you wanted to do this. Of course, your lines are going to be a little bit different. They're going to come in, potentially on the side or whatnot, not exactly the same as this one. What's the easiest? Well, obviously, like for like is going to be the easiest. So if you're looking at going, hey, I'm going to replace everything, I might as well just throw a compressor in as well into the mix. It'd be easiest to go with the first one. Now, my decision really revolved around upgrading the AC and going with the 134A refrigerant. That led us to upgrade the following. So basically, we went with a newer style condenser. It's a lot lighter, but also it has a built-in dryer. It was custom made locally, so we'll talk about that a little bit. There's 3 AC lines. There's 2 service valves, right? So that's kind of, a gimme, if you will, if you're going to be doing this. We said, hey, by the way, might as well go with the new compressor. No sense in doing all this work, adding the refrigerant, and then having some sort of issue with a 60-year-old compressor. So we went with a newer, I went with the York compressor that looks like this. But again, the newer style ones are, I'd just say, maybe a little bit more efficient. They're a little bit lighter in terms of the metals and things like that. Expansion valve, which I'll show you. And then we did have to use a good used part for a good used clutch. So my clutch was bad. And the video towards the end, I'll give a little bit of on-site video commentary, and you'll see how you can test the clutch, or there's other videos on YouTube. Now, one reason that I would have Blair or someone do this versus me trying to do it all at my own home is Blair's more of an expert, but there's a few things you have to do. You have to add oil into the system. So you're supposed to really add that per the specs. And then the 134A refrigerant, I don't have the valves. I don't have the stuff to vacuum it out and then charge it. You can, of course, go to your local parts store and buy that stuff if that's something you really want to do. Now, this was, I think, the thumbnail I used for part 1, so I will link to part 1 at the end. And here's what we've got. So the condenser. Now, you can actually go with, and I just added this before I started this video. If I jump to the next slide, this is from Lincoln Land right here. They've got blown up diagrams on their website. And this is a 65 condenser that I found on the web. And this was just right on eBay right here. So I'll bounce back over here. And you could potentially just say, hey, I want to go buy this. And I think the price was, let's just say, give or take, it's $330 or so, plus shipping potentially. So you could upgrade if you wanted. What we did is we decided to go with a newer style, and this is maybe a vintage air product. I've seen these, I've used these in other projects, and basically when it comes shipped, typically it's not going to have these mounts. These mounts were added, and if you contact me, Lincoln Addict podcast at gmail.com, I can get you in contact with Blair. And Blair, if you're serious about upgrading your system and you want to do something like this, he could work back with you or TC, and they can, basically, charge you for the time and you shipping your parts, potentially what may need to be shipped, and then they'll get this made for you. But these are the 3 top mounts, and then these are the 2 bottom mounts. Now, these are a little bit of a bear to get these bolts out. It looks easy, but I tell you, on the car, it does take a little bit. You have to put a wrench on one side, which makes it a pain. The cool thing about this is, number one, it's a lot lighter. It's easier to, put in the top or below when you're installing it, but it also has the dryer built in. So it's kind of a nice thing. Same mounting points. There's 5 mounting points that you can see there. If you wanted to go and start replacing individual pieces, you can still source the original style condenser. And this is from Lincoln Land. So you can go on their website. This is all free. You can actually look at all of these blown up diagrams. You can see the dryer here is a lot bigger on these old systems. And this happens to be possibly one of my old ones, but regardless of that, this is at Blair's, and you can see just really how, these things are a behemoth. They're actually pretty heavy as well. Now, don't throw your old one away, because these mounts would be needed. So, potentially for a core, if you were looking to have Blair or someone even locally to you, they're going to want to take these pieces off and reuse them potentially. Now, in addition to, you saw kind of the list, in addition to what we've talked about so far, you're basically going to need 3 lines. So you would think the thought process is, hey, if I'm replacing XYZ, why not go and just do everything? And that's what we did. And you could potentially make these if you wanted. There's a tool. I have it. It's a crimping tool. But it's easier just to take your stuff and provide it over. If Blair is going to get the stuff made and you're going to pay and have him do it, it's easier. Now, the muffler that's on this card, I don't have a photo of it. These cards have a factory muffler, if you will, that's on one of these lines. That gets eliminated. So that is also taken into consideration when this line is made, because the other line is going to be a little bit longer, so that muffler is not in here. It'll make more sense when you look at your car. There are 2 service valves. I bought these from Classic Auto Air many years ago, and technically one of these was not the right one. I forget which one, but certainly we had to then go up and get the right one from a local place. Luckily, we were able to source it. And then the compressor. So this is the newer, what I refer to as a York style compressor. This came from Classic Auto Air. And again, you can see the metals that it's made of. It's a lot lighter. And apparently it's a little bit more efficient, you would think, 60 years later. The clutch has to be bolted on, and the wire harness that comes off the other compressor would have to be reused. Unfortunately, I misplaced mine, and I had to source that from Lincoln Land. Now, this is a little tarnished and dirty. It sat in a box for a while, and I have since kind of cleaned this off, but you can see there what it looked like the day we were installing it. And you can see this was literally the night I drove home, ice cold AC, and this is what it looked like with the hoses installed there going over to it. And we can see here it's got the blue up and this color to the left. And if we look over here, yeah, this was the incorrect one. So we had to swap that out. I think it was the wrong size here for the line, if I remember correctly. Okay. Now, in addition to that, the expansion valve. So there's a lot of good videos on YouTube. There's a guy I like to watch, Uncle Tony's Garage, kind of an old school hot rod Mopar guy, but I always enjoy his commentary. And he recently did a video and I'll put a link to it in the description if you want to check it out, where he explains the difference between like a Ford, a GM, and like Mopar, kind of the AC systems. He does a high level on how it actually works. I know the expansion valve is an integral part of that, but this is an expansion valve, and they vary in price greatly depending on the year. So if you go on Lincoln Land site, this is a blown up image from there, and you'll see like 61, 2, and 3. I think the piece is a lot more expensive. 64, 65 was a little bit more reasonable. And again, there's a bunch of diagrams. I'm going to click over here, and this was drilling down to this category on their website, and you can actually see you can even get the AC compressor if you want through them, but they have it all listed by year, so it's pretty cool. Okay, so what I want to do next is talk about the parts, or continue talking about the parts. So basically the clutch here that you can see is the is the one that came off the car, and this is the good used part. So I was able to go over to Lincoln Land, and as I mentioned, I did misplace the small wiring plug. So keep that, don't lose that. And you can go on their website, as I mentioned, and you can see here's the clutch bolting onto the front of the compressor. Now, the steps to perform the work. So I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit so we can finish this out, and then I'll show you a little bit of on-site commentary. What you're going to do is, I always recommend disconnecting the battery or putting it on some sort of battery charger, especially if the doors are open and things like that. You're going to remove the top radiator mount to gain access to the condenser. There's also a bottom splash shield. You may have success either taking the old one out above or below, depending on if it's on a lift, or we did all this on the ground, kind of the concrete floor, if you will. But certainly getting that original one out, you have to finagle it a little bit. You can see here the old compressor, and unfortunately in this image, you don't see that big muffler that's there. But again, that's not needed. It's not necessary. Unless you're going for, 100-point kind of factory specs, if you will. Another piece, and again, the order may vary on the steps you decide, but I want to be very clear here. When you start to remove the AC lines, this line here, this copper line coming out, going into the firewall, that's where the expansion valve is at, and you'll see that in the video. You need to take care not to kind of really muscle that too hard. There's videos on YouTube using heat and or cooling to be able to get off if you've got something that's stuck. So what I would tell you is be very conscious of not manhandling this, so to speak, and take care on doing that. In addition, this one here is this big guy right in front of this. Note that we did drop, and you'll see in the video, we did drop the wiper motor. And the reason for that is I highly suggest, and Blair does as well, that you put a wrench on this. And you're going to be hard-pressed to have a wrench that's going to fit in here. Depending on your tool set, you may be able to get something in there to hold it. But certainly these two, I don't think this has ever been taken off. But you want to take care, because like what Blair and Teresa were telling me, if you get into a situation where something spins back here or breaks, you're then either going to not have air condition, or you're going to have to take your dash out if you really get crazy on that. Okay, so you're going to then remove the compressor if you're opting to obviously swap the compressor. From what I recall, I think there's these 4 bolts underneath, and there's like 3 or so bolts that go into the block that kind of make it where you can adjust the tension on it. 65 is a little bit different than maybe some of the other years, and it can be a pain. It's a little easier if you have smaller hands, but certainly at the end of the day, you're looking at the compressor, and if you want to change it, you have to remove it, and you have to bolt the other one on. So obviously take it off, and then you're going to repeat these steps, if you will, when you go to reinstall. You're going to replace all the parts that were removed. You're going to vacuum test or vacuum the system, test for leaks. That's important. You're going to add oil and then refrigerant. Again, I don't do this stuff on a daily basis. I certainly know what needs to be done, and I did help, but it's not something I do every day. A couple of recommendations: if you're in the South area or in Florida, or you want to ship your car to Blair Farmer, email me, lincolnaddictpodcast@gmail.com, and I will get you in touch with him. Make a plan. Decide on if you're going to use original components or if you're going to do a full upgrade. then order what you need. Make sure you have the right service valves. Do a checklist. Make sure you have everything, because if you start to do this on a Saturday and stuff is closed, certainly then your options are going to be limited. You're going to have to wait till the next weekend or whatnot. Check for leaks prior to adding expensive refrigerant. This is important to me. People often ask me why I don't do this certain stuff myself. It's because I don't have all the tools, and for as little as I do this type of work, I'd rather support someone like Blair who knows it like the back of his hand. Take caution, as I said, when removing the expansion valve, as you don't want to break anything. And then even after you make these updates, you still may need to do work inside the cabin of the car. Now, my rule of thumb is if you can go out to your car and start it up and flip that switch on and you feel AC coming, or you feel air coming out, but it's just not cold, more than likely everything is working like on my 65, and you just need to do the things underneath the hood that are actually doing the magic to remove the heat from, the air, so to speak. And then lastly, the muffler, as I mentioned earlier, and again, I don't have a good photo here. You may see it in the video. That big muffler that's there, that's really overkill. It does not need to be reused. And that's, you'll see that on the AC line. Typically, it'll have a little, like a door-looking VIN plate on it as well. And that, I'll see if I can insert an image here while I'm doing the post-production, but that does not need to be reused, and that's basically eliminated in this update that I did. Thanks for watching. Let's now jump into some on-site video that hopefully will add a little flavor to what I just covered. Thanks again. Now that I'm done with the presentation, I'll show you or narrate a little bit of what happened that day. There's other videos out there, but this is how you test the clutch. You basically have to ground it and then put power to it. That'll tell you if it's still working. I had to go over to Lincoln Land, of course, and pick one up. Here is the condenser kind of leaning up in front of the car, and you see the compressor and some of the lines. The compressor's already mounted. The radiator's tilted forward, so the condenser has not been installed yet. And you can see it is a newer style compressor. This thing is really light compared to the original. And you've got your keyway, if you will. The clutch itself only goes on one way. You can see over here we do have towels laid down. There's the clutch. There's some of Blair's essential tools on how to test it. You basically ground it, and then, again, there's other videos out there, but you touch the power to that, and it'll basically tell you, you'll know if it's working or not there. The condenser, as I mentioned, you see the 3 mounts on the right, which actually round to the top, and then the 2 on the left will mount down in the factory spots if you go through Blair Farmer to pick up those parts. There's the expansion valve, and you can see that that's new. What we did is we did drop, it's kind of a pain, we did drop the windshield wiper motor. I know there's, depending on your tools and your skill set, you may be able to do it a different way. You can see some of the lines here, everything kind of laid out. Those, again, you could get potentially made locally if you took your existing ones there. And you see some of the, those 2 of the service valves, one of them is incorrect. So we actually had to have one delivered that day. Luckily, we were able to do that. And of course, the clutch is going to go on right there. The wiring plug is not listed there, or it's not shown. And I had to get another one of those. There's Blair doing some of his work. So again, thanks again, Blair Farmer. If you email me, lincolnaddictpodcast@gmail.com, I can get you in contact with him. Here you're seeing from the passenger side over, those were the valves I had purchased from Classic Auto Air. And I did throw some duct tape on there towards the end because of the valve situation. You're not supposed to have any air getting into the condenser. You've only gotten a certain amount of time. So what I ended up doing is trying to keep it sealed, but it ended up being fine in the long run. Here I'm just kind of walking around to show... right there's the condenser, and then you see the 90 that comes out. That's one of the lines, and you got to tighten those down, of course. I don't want to over tighten them. To me, the one cool thing is the compressor looks a lot nicer. The old one was painted black, so that's something to keep in mind, that you end up with that kind of new look. If depending on what yours is, I don't know if they were I think they were painted black from the factory, if I remember correctly. Okay, next I'm just kind of showing the engine bay. This is back in November of 2022, and you'll see right to the right, we've actually dropped right here is the windshield wiper motor. So depending on your tools, it might be easier for you We did drop that so we could get a wrench back there, and that aided in removing the expansion valve. So there's the old compressor that's black. That's the one I was just talking about. And then there is the new compressor. You can see you got to use the same mount, of course. Okay, here on the left, that is where that big nut, where that copper line comes out. That's where the expansion valve goes. So again, you have to be careful in taking that out. That's really, really important. So, use caution there. There's other videos on how to take care of that if you're just being a beast. And then, of course, the one to the right of it, that's where you have to get the wrench behind it to be able to hold the nut on the back side in order to get the bigger nut on the front side. So it looks easier than it is, but certainly if you decide to do the lines like I did, you're going to want to take caution there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up now. I really appreciate you watching. A little bit longer than I had anticipated. Hopefully something in the video will help you, whether it motivates you to get your air conditioning working, or maybe there was something that you just didn't feel confident in doing. I know it wasn't a very, very detailed, hands-on video, but for the most part, I think you're either going to be confident enough to do this on your own, or you could show someone that's maybe more mechanically inclined that would be willing to do the job for you locally. You could say, hey, these are the parts we need. And to be honest, anybody that's a good mechanic, if they have the parts, they're going to be able to perform the upgrade. Certainly, Lincolns in general do add a bit of what I would say complexity to it. It can be a little frustrating, and I know there's some places that may not want to work on a Lincoln, but certainly, hopefully there's something in this video that you learned, or something, again, as I mentioned, that might give you the confidence to say, hey, you know what? I've had my Lincoln X amount of time. I want to get the air conditioning working. Jason ODB did it. Now I know I can do it. So with that being said, thank you for the support. Check out Lincoln Addict Podcast. It's free, LincolnAddictPodcast.com. And again, thank you so much for the support. It took me a while to get this video done, but it's done. Stay on the rise, everyone. Peace.